Research tells us that right now there are fewer jobs being advertised than for a number of years. Summer is often quieter, but the job market is quieter than what is typical for this time of year. And with vacancies down, that means an already competitive industry like media is even more competitive. Whether you're starting out or trying to change jobs, it's even more critical to stand out from the crowd and make sure your applications really sing. But it's also important to manage expectations and not let the world of recruitment affect your mental health. Dealing with rejection is hard, but dealing with unanswered applications is almost worse than rejection. If you know what you're doing wrong, at least you can try to fix it. So don't let that radio silence distract you from your ultimate ambition and goal to have a job in media or progress your media career. It just might need a bit more time. I'm David Spencer, and welcome to the Media Mentor podcast. In this series, I share advice and guidance for media careers and talk to people I've helped, speak to media colleagues and industry figures and experts about the psychology of careers and also the confusing world of recruitment. Already, we've learned about AI and its impact on recruitment from both sides, how it might impact your CV and cover letters, and how it's used by recruiters. We've also talked about getting stuck in your career and how to get unstuck. And we've heard from Elise and Ethan about how they moved to having a job from the job hunt through some gentle guidance from me. And today we're going to look at some of your questions raised in the early episodes. So Teo is back to ask them for you. Teo, thank you very much indeed for joining me again. We're going to cover some of the things that people have got in touch with, having heard the early episodes of the podcast shortly. I think we're also going to talk about some of the most common issues, and you were intrigued that there's quite a big overlap with your own mindset with that. And on all of our episodes, hopefully you are going to be learning things. You're going to be getting into what I think is a right way to think about job applications and helping you improve your applications and hopefully guiding you on this journey and giving you a little bit of inspiration.
I think because I know there are a lot of people and you have a lot of clients, great background as well, like a lot of diverse people, from students to older people, the people that want to change their careers. What are the most common issues?
Well, I think we talked the first time about how everyone is unique, but what's the point of that uniqueness was what we said. And you need to sort of say about all your experience and your life experience, your study, work experience, and frame that in a way that makes an employer think that's valuable and interesting. But there are a lot of things that people have that are very similar when I deal with clients. And I often say to people, for example, we're going to talk about the statement on a CV in a moment. And when I talk about that part of job applications, a lot of the time people are saying to me, I just don't like talking about myself.
Yes, I have that problem. I don't like talking about myself, especially because I never know if I talk too much or too less. Sometimes I feel like I'm very narcissistic if I do. And I don't know how to put it, like I don't know how to make it sound that is perfect, like the perfect amount of everything.
But I don't think there is a perfect. And this is one of the realities that if you are looking to create the perfect CV, the perfect job application, that is purely in the eye of the receiver. We don't know how the operation works at the company you're applying to, whether they actually ever look at your CV or whether they look at the cover letter, what they're looking for when they're hiring. So to think that we need to get that perfect every time is unrealistic. But back to the key point about, it's not narcissistic to talk well about yourself. So most of the time, the common thing that people say is, I remember a very early client said to me, I just think my cover letters or my statements sound cheesy. And also, I don't want to sound arrogant. So I'll be honest, most people that come to me for help and advice are lovely people, not arrogant people. because arrogant people don't ask for help. And it may be a perception that they do better. They might think they're doing everything right and they might think that they're successful, but we don't have to worry about them. But commonly people are worried about coming across as arrogant and find selling themselves, if we frame it as selling, really difficult. And what I always say to clients is there's a different A word that you're looking for, Teo, with how you talk about yourself. It's not arrogance, it's being assertive. And being assertive is kind of, if you visualize it, and I do a lot of visualizations in my mentoring sessions when I talk about scenarios, but instead of, walking into a room where there are potential employers and sort of like, hey, I'm David and I've got a really great CV and I reckon you need to give me a job. I mean, even listening to that sounds awful. But also, go, hi, sorry to interrupt your meeting. I'm David and I've got a great CV. Sorry to bother you. Anyway, here's my CV. Hope to hear from you. Bye. And a lot of people that get in touch have got job applications, cover letters, CVs that feel like that latter. Don't have the clients that are the former, the ones that are just storming into that room to introduce themselves. Somewhere in between is the right thing. So what do you imagine being assertive, if you try and apply that mindset to you, Teo, means?
I think in a way I need to be honest about who I am, especially in a statement. I also need to be very straightforward with what I want and what I did mostly. And I think it takes a bit of time together.
When we say be assertive rather than arrogant, it's about going, well, during my university degree, I was editor, as you were, for example, I know, for a couple of the news days. So you could say that starts to be a bit more interesting because, funnily enough, not everyone was editor.
Yeah.
But then you go, well, what did that involve? What stories did you cover? So I was editor on a number of the university's news days, including when there was a demonstration by farmers in London, or there was this event. And I had to organise a journalist to go, student colleague, journalist, to go and interview someone. And we had to turn that interview around for a tight deadline of 6 o'clock in the evening, having decided to do the story at 2 in the afternoon. So you get a little bit more specific with that experience. Way too often, not wanting to be arrogant and not wanting to, narcissistic you called it, but kind of be too much talking about yourself means that you end up leaving out lots of details. And it's not, I'm brilliant, I'm fantastic. That doesn't mean anything.
I think it's about yourself in that process. It's not, I was great at doing this, but it's more about, so that's what we did and that's how the process went. So we sent the student there and they interviewed, and coming back to the studios, to the gallery, the quality of the audio wasn't good enough. So as an editor, I had to make a tough decision and cut that and add something else instead. I think that's the way you should frame it, because you always use the word frame.
Frame. I do use that word a lot. But that's a perfect example, because in there it's a decision you've had to make which may have upset someone in the process.
Yes.
So it's a difficult decision. And that's what we want to see. So I talk a lot about, don't tell me the tasks you do. Don't tell me the modules you do at a university on a degree. We all do the same modules largely.
Yeah.
But you don't make the same content. You don't have the same news days. You don't have the situation where someone comes back with audio that's not good enough and you have to tell them, well, we've got to find a different way to tell this story. So you use examples to demonstrate your skill set.
I think it's just about going deeper and deeper rather than, as you said, just putting there one module, 2 modules. It's like, what about that module? Let's break it down. What have you done? What was the content you produced? What was the materials you used? What was, in particular, the experience you had with that module? Not just like, I studied podcast production. Brilliant. Everyone does that.
Exactly. But you, just as you talked about those things, as you were saying about, what did I do? What did I create? Your energy is different. And then when you say, I studied podcast creation. I mean, it's good. You've learned how to make podcasts. but a lot of people learn how to do it. So you're exactly right. If you pull out the experience, and this is true whether you're a student, a graduate, or if you're later in your career, you've still got to pull out that experience. I can say I'm brilliant under pressure. I work to tight deadlines. I'm calm, all those kind of things. But where's the proof?
Yeah, show me an example or show me a situation when you were going through that and how did you handle it? Because you said you're brilliant under pressure, but you want to see.
We want to see it. It's like the more generic stuff you see on a CV and you see in applications. We've already talked on the podcast about the passion word that people use too often. Well, tell me, how does that manifest itself? I'm really interested you're passionate, but I want to see where that passion takes you. But also, no one ever says, I'm not much of a team player. I don't really like other people. I'm often a bit rubbish in the mornings, so, put me on afternoon shifts. I'm a bit grumpy if I don't eat, or I'm not very good under tight deadlines and I get very stressed. No one's going to say that. So saying all the other things that sound good, but really they're just what you think you should say. Find the examples that prove that you can do those things. And that can be projects at university, news days. It can be work you're doing as part of a degree that you're doing for free. It could be creating a podcast with the Media Mentor as an example in your case. There are learnings you take from this that you then put in an application that someone looks at and goes, they've been involved in the evolution of a podcast from concept to launch. And that sounds much better than helped on the Media Mentor podcast.
However, I do have a question about this because I feel like a lot of people might think the same way. What are you doing in cases where there is not enough space? I mean, obviously, on the CV, you do have to be strict with the word count, with how you frame it. And it's different in an interview. When you actually get to the stage of the interview, then that's the moment when you have more time to talk about yourself and your experiences. But even in the cover letter, as I said in the other episode, some of them have a word count, 400 words, 250. How do you say it so it's enough space there?
Well, I think making sure that you get, on a CV, you don't have to have lots of examples. It's just good to have a few that demonstrate core skills. But I think if you then expand on that a bit in a cover letter to give those examples, because normally people are doing that a bit better in cover letters because the whole idea is to talk about yourself a little bit more. But you obviously don't want to just repeat lots of examples saying the same thing. What I see commonly is people on a CV and in a cover letter have used lots and lots of examples to just say the same thing. Mm-hmm. Once I know you can cope with a tight deadline, I don't need to see it another 5 times. Use one example to do that job. But I do think something's really interesting that you said, because a client said to me once about putting this kind of thing in a CV and a cover letter. They said, David, but I was going to do this in job interviews. And I said, but you've come to me not getting any job interviews. So who are you telling this particular bit of information? And here's a really good example from my history of working with people. And I use this example a lot. This person had spent a week at the Mail Online on work experience. And their CV said the dates of when they'd been at the Mail Online work experience. That's all it said. Mail Online, work experience, 1 week. I looked at the dates and I thought, quite an interesting week that. So in the session, I said, anything happened while you were at the Mail Online? And they went, oh, that was the Brexit referendum week. And I worked on the Friday. On the Friday, it was really mad because I had to write 2 articles because it was so busy. I had to write 2 articles that then got published.
Oh.
And I went, right. So on your CV, all you've said is the Mail Online for a week. Yet right there is you've been published by the world's biggest English-speaking newspaper at the time, the biggest political story in the UK since the Second World War, and you haven't mentioned it. Now, that's a really big miss in that example. But what it does, big story, under pressure, big brand example. And when you're saying about what do you put in, well, there when you start thinking about those examples, that client, when they then put it in their CV, when they then went for a job interview and they talked about that experience, funnily enough, it wasn't long before they got a job. But it also helped them when they went for that job interview to be thinking about that example. Because often people walk out of a job interview and go, oh, facepalm, if only I'd remembered that. Mm-hmm. And if you're doing this, turn it around. Think about all the good things you've done, the examples, and demonstrate those skills. You're putting a bit on the CV. You have to fill it out. Like you said, space might be an issue. Cover letters, put a bit more in. Give me a bit more colour. But in job interviews, they're also front of mind. And also, if people see it on a CV, in that example, oh, you were at the Mail Online and you had 2 articles published. Tell me about that day. What was it like? That's a much better conversation than, tell me about a time when you've made a difference in a newsroom. Because they didn't know that story. So if they don't know, they can't ask you about it. But if they've seen it on a CV or they've seen it in a cover letter, they pick it out and they go, oh, circle it. I'm going to ask that question. And then if you put those examples in your CV and your cover letters, Theo, people will come to you in interviews and go, so you've mentioned that. What happened? Much better conversation.
I get it. On that note, you mentioned about you trying not to be too repetitive in your CV with saying 5 times that you had 2 articles published or something. But then how many diverse your skills needs to be for that specific job? How do you go there?
Well, I think it's a really good question because some advice is to have a different CV for every job. You will see that a lot. Tailor your CV for every job. I just think that's unrealistic. I think it's exhausting, mind-numbing, draining.
It seems like the cover letters. Really.
Yeah, but I think with the cover letter, it is worth investing a bit more time. But with a CV, your CV should be your CV. It's a boring document that's our work history. But I think there is an element where you kind of sometimes have to pick out the skills that suit a certain job. I think at the stage you're at, Theo, if you're on a master's and you're applying for a broadish sweep of media jobs, your CV just needs to be your CV.
I have one more question before we're going to wrap up everything.
I think we can do one more, can't we?
Yes, we can squeeze another one there. Just because we didn't manage to answer this one in the last episode we did. So I put it down this time with exclamation marks. Like, don't
so
forget
we've got
to
to
ask.
do it.
Yes, we have to do it. I was going to ask, because you mentioned in the other episode about going to different people and asking for different opinions is going to be confusing and frustrating sometimes. And that happened to me at some point in my career, my life. I went to family members, to relatives, to friends, but I never went to an expert. And what would you say is better?
Well, I think a lot of people listening might go, well, Theo, surely you go to an expert. But of course, a session with the media mentor costs a bit of money. Whoever it is as an expert may mean you spending money. We also have friends and family around us all the time that have very good intention, that want to help. So free advice, paying for advice, you may well obviously want to listen to people that are in and around you. Couple of things that I think when I was saying don't listen to too many voices is the key thing. Because you put a CV in front of 6 or 7 people in recruitment, they're not all going to agree about whether the CV is good or bad. There will be different things. So I think it's very hard to please everyone. So I think a bit of clarity is important. And if you go to too many people, that clouds it a little bit, and it maybe means that you get more confused. And what you're getting out of it is actually you're thinking, well, I'm hearing these voices and now I really don't know what I'm doing. Whereas what you were trying to do by talking to those people is trying to get more and more clarity, and it goes the other way. But obviously speaking to an expert is important. I think what I see quite a lot is with CVs and job applications, people not speaking to experts, people who are not in media.
Yes, because I was about to highlight that. When we're talking about experts, we're talking about obviously friends and family members, they are part of an industry and they might have experience, but they might not be in your area.
And I think that's true with media. There are lots of things that are similar in other industries, but it's unique, it's different. And I think understanding the industry, understanding how things work is very difficult for people who've never done it. So that's where I think, even from the practical point of view of what should a CV look like, I think people who don't understand media can sometimes lead you a little bit astray and kind of lend to that confusion because they don't understand what we need from media, not understand the workings of media, how you have to maybe be freelance before you get a job, the types of job that are right for you. And it's something we'll talk much more about on the podcast. What are the right job titles? What are the right jobs for graduates to go for? All of that is very confusing. If you speak to someone who has media experience, industry experience, that has got to be really useful. And I've obviously going to say a conversation with me will help with some of that clarity more than it might do if you speak to someone who works in recruitment, but they work in recruitment in a completely different industry.
That's a lot. I feel like I've learned a lot today, but at the same time, I feel like the questions are coming all the time. So I made a few notes. I write down a lot of questions, and I'm pretty sure you'll be very helpful at answering them in the next episodes.
Well, I will try, but there is so much, as you can tell, that kind of feeds into each part of the process. Teo, as your journey continues, as your application continues, you're going to have more and more of these sort of questions. And I think people listening to these episodes, thank you so much for all the feedback, and keep those questions coming, because when I speak to clients, there are a lot of similarities, but everyone is different. Everyone is in a different situation. Everyone has slightly different challenges. Comes back to the listening to lots of different voices that we've been talking about. It might depend on your certain situation, some of the things that I would say. And so I'm really interested to hear from you about some of your challenges, and actually even some of your stories about recruitment, whether you've worked with me on that or whether you've had experiences that you'd like others to hear. I'd love to hear from you on the Media Mentor podcast. Teo raised some really good points there. And what strikes me again is that many of the things that those of us with more experience might consider obvious, of course, aren't, especially when you're starting out or are new to the job market or new to media. Having support and a mentor can really help with that, because it's a huge step moving from education into the workplace full-time or changing careers mid-life. And as we've heard on the series already, feeling alone in the job hunt is very common. So make sure you get some support and don't let this process overwhelm you and affect your mental health. Speak to someone before it gets to that stage. If you want to ask me something on the next episode of your questions in this series, then get in touch and maybe I'll invite you onto the podcast to ask me directly. That's it for this latest episode. If you're feeling overwhelmed and lonely in the job hunt, then you can get in touch via the mediamentor.info and maybe I can help you move forward. If you want to keep across the latest media jobs, they're all on my website. And to get the jobs as we find them, we have the WhatsApp channel where all those jobs and the direct links are shared. You'll find the link for that at the top of my website, or the details are in the pod description. Thanks again to Teo for sharing her thoughts on this episode. And thanks too to Mrs. Mentor for doing the feed and keeping those job pages on the website refreshed. And thank you to Josh Sommer for writing this music. And thank you for listening. Remember to click follow on your podcast player to keep up to date with the latest episodes. And please, if you have time, write a review if you've enjoyed listening.